All right, let's dive right in. We're going to tackle one of the biggest, oldest questions there is. What is reality? I mean, really, is the world out there, the floor under your feet, the sun in the sky? Is it all just physical stuff? Or could it be something else, something much, much closer to home? So to get our heads around this, think about it like this. Imagine you're a pilot flying a jumbo jet. Now, the sky outside, the real weather, the wind speeds, that's all incredibly complex, right? But you don't fly the plane by sticking your head out the window. Of course not. You look at your dashboard. You've got these dials, these lights, these readouts. They represent the sky in a simple, useful way. So here's the question. What if our whole experience of the physical world is just like that dashboard? Now, before we explore that idea, we first have to understand the default setting, the cultural operating system we're all running. It's the reigning champion of worldviews, and it's called physicalism.
This is the story most of us grew up with. You know, the universe is made of physical stuff, matter and energy, and it exists completely on its own, outside of any mind. And inside your head, you have this incredibly complex 3-pound organ called a brain. And somehow, that lump of matter, it generates you. It creates your thoughts, your feelings, your entire consciousness. The brain is the cause. Your mind is the effect. Simple.
Okay, but here's a key detail. Even the most hardcore physicalist will admit that the experience of the color red isn't actually out there. They agree the qualities of our experience, what philosophers call qualia, are cooked up inside our heads. But they insist that the structure of what we see, the roundness of the basketball, its motion through the air, that stuff perfectly mirrors a real physical basketball that's actually out there. The dashboard in this view is supposed to look an awful lot like the real thing.
And this is where physicalism hits a brick wall. It's what's famously called the hard problem of consciousness. Think about it. There is absolutely nothing about the properties of a particle, its mass, its charge, its spin, that can explain the quality of an experience. How do you get the feeling of being in love or the taste of chocolate from a bunch of atoms whizzing around? Physicalism just doesn't have an answer. It's a total mystery.
So, if the reigning champ is on the ropes, what about a challenger? Well, this brings us to a completely different way of looking at things, an alternative called idealism. It takes all the same facts, all the same science, and just reframes it completely.
Idealism flips the whole script. It says, what if we've got it backwards? What if consciousness isn't some weird fluke that pops out of matter? What if consciousness is the fundamental stuff of reality itself? In this view, the physical world, including your own brain, isn't outside of consciousness. It's what certain processes within consciousness look like. Let's go back to our pilot in the cockpit. Under idealism, the sky is the vast world of mental processes that exist outside of your personal awareness. Your senses, your eyes, your ears, they're the plain sensors. And your perception of a solid physical world, that's the dashboard. It's an accurate, incredibly useful representation, but it's just a representation. A fuel gauge doesn't look anything like gasoline, right? It's the same idea. Our world doesn't have to look like the reality it represents. And this has huge implications for science. So when a neuroscientist puts you in a scanner and looks at your brain activity, they are not seeing the thing that is causing your thoughts. They are seeing the image of your thoughts. They're looking at what your inner mental life looks like from their vantage point, from outside your personal bubble of mind. The brain isn't a mind factory. It's the dashboard icon for a mind.
Here's probably the best way to get it. For physicalism, the brain is like a factory that produces a product called consciousness. But for idealism, all of consciousness is like a single massive stream of water. And your personal individual mind, it's like a whirlpool in that stream, a specific localized pattern of flow. And the brain? The brain is just what that whirlpool looks like if you're another whirlpool looking at it. A whirlpool doesn't generate water, it's just what the water is doing right there.
Okay, so we have two competing stories about reality. How in the world do we test them? Well, we look at the stuff they can't explain. For physicalism, there's a growing pile of scientific findings, anomalies, that just don't fit the model. But for idealism, these same weird findings are often exactly what you'd predict. Let's take psychedelics. Brain scan studies consistently show that when someone is having a profoundly rich, complex, expanded experience on something like psilocybin, their brain activity actually goes down, significantly. Now, for physicalism, that's a huge problem. It's a complete paradox. More mind should mean more brain activity, not less. But for idealism, it makes perfect sense. If the brain acts like a filter that narrows consciousness down, then reducing that filter, well, it lets more of reality in.
And it's not a one-off thing. This pattern shows up again and again. You see it in acquired savant syndrome, where brain damage suddenly unlocks incredible new talents. You see it in near-death experiences, where people report lucid, complex perceptions while their brain should be completely offline. You see it in trance mediums, a decrease in brain activity that goes along with more complex mental feats. In case after case, less brain seems to mean more mind. It's an anomaly for physicalism, but it's exhibit A for idealism.
And this isn't just about weird brain states. This goes all the way down to the foundations of physics. For a century, quantum mechanics has been telling us something incredibly strange. The properties of the physical world seem to depend on whether we're looking. An electron doesn't even have a definite position until a conscious observer measures it. This quantum weirdness is a nightmare for a worldview that says there's a solid, independent world out there. But if the world is fundamentally mental, isn't it kind of obvious that the act of observation would play a key role?
And look, this isn't some fringe idea cooked up by philosophers. Listen to what Johns Hopkins physicist Richard Kahn Henry wrote in the journal Nature. He says the universe is entirely mental, and that trying to hold on to a material world is really just trying to preserve an illusion. The point here is crucial. Idealism doesn't throw out science, it just reframes it. It gives all those scientific facts a new and maybe even more coherent home. So, this has been a fascinating head trip, for sure. But what does it actually mean for you, for me, for how we live our lives? Well, if you switch the lens from physicalism to idealism, the implications are absolutely massive.
For starters, your consciousness isn't some little ghost trapped inside your skull. No, your body is an event happening within a field of consciousness. And physical death, it's not a light switching off. It's just the end of that localized whirlpool, dissolving back into the wider stream of awareness. Suddenly, the world around us isn't a cold, dead, meaningless machine. It's a symbolic expression of a universal inner life, and our physical health becomes the literal, visible image of our inner mental state. They aren't separate things.
So, in the end, it really boils down to this one question about who you are. Are you an accidental flicker of awareness, a biological robot living in a vast, pointless universe just waiting for your light to go out? Or are you what a vast, living, universal consciousness looks like when it's experiencing itself from one particular point of view? Which of those stories actually makes more sense of everything we know? That's the question.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into an idea that's, well, it's so radical, it might just flip everything you think you know about reality on its head. And yeah, that includes your place in it. You know, we all just kind of go through life assuming that what we see is what we get, right? That our eyes and ears are giving us a straight, honest picture of the world, like looking through a perfectly clean window. But what if that's not true? What if that window isn't a window at all? What if what you're seeing right now is more like a user interface? And that's where this dashboard analogy comes in. It's a fantastic way to think about it. Imagine you're a pilot. You've got all these dials and gauges on your dashboard. Altitude, speed, fuel, they give you absolutely critical information you need to fly the plane and, not crash. But here's the thing. The dial showing your altitude doesn't look like the sky. The fuel gauge isn't actually fuel. They're just symbols, useful representations. And this theory says that's exactly what our senses are doing. The space around you, the colors, the objects, they're just icons on your own personal dashboard. Super useful for getting by, for sure, but they are not, I repeat, not the actual objective reality. Okay, so if that's true, if our perception is just a dashboard, what does that do to the mainstream story of reality, the one we've all been taught? Well, that story is called physicalism. It's kind of the default setting for our culture. The idea is that fundamentally, everything is just physical stuff. Tiny, dead particles bouncing around. And our consciousness, the actual feeling of being alive, the experience of seeing red or feeling joy, oh, that's just something that the brain's complex wiring kind of magically cooks up as a side effect. And here's where it gets really weird. To make this physicalist story hold together, some of its biggest proponents basically say we have to ignore the only thing we know for sure, our own first-person experience, the feeling of being you, right now. They're forced to argue it's just some kind of illusion the brain creates. But that leaves a huge, glaring question, doesn't it? How? How do you get the rich inner feeling of being you from a bunch of non-conscious stuff? How do atoms and neurons, which have no experience themselves, suddenly create the taste of coffee or the feeling of being in love? It just doesn't add up. It's like trying to get water from a rock that's completely dry. This right here is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. And honestly, within a purely physical world, it seems like an impossible puzzle to solve. So, if the main story has a hole this big in it, maybe, just maybe, it's the wrong story. Maybe we need to look at this from a completely different angle. All right, so let's do exactly that. Let's look at an alternative that flips everything completely upside down. So instead of starting with matter and trying to get mind out of it, this view does the exact opposite. It says, no, you've got it backwards. It proposes that what we call matter is just the appearance of mind. The brain doesn't produce your consciousness. The brain is what a conscious process looks like from the outside. This idea has a name, idealism. And let's be super clear here. This isn't saying, oh, it's all just a dream in your personal head. Not at all. It's much bigger than that. It's suggesting that everything, you, me, the planet, the entire cosmos, is all happening as a pattern of excitation, like a thought, inside one single universal mind. Okay, but wait, right? The first thing you're going to ask is, if it's all one big mind, then why do I feel like me and not you? Why are our thoughts private? It's a great question, and the theory actually has a brilliant, surprisingly simple metaphor to explain it. It's the whirlpool metaphor. So picture this. That one universal consciousness is like a giant flowing stream of water. Now, an individual mind, what this theory calls an alter, is like a whirlpool that forms in that stream. See, the whirlpool is a localized, self-contained little vortex. It's still 100% made of the exact same water as the rest of the stream, but it has its own boundary, its own identity, its own private inner world. That whirlpool, that's you. That's me. So this leads us to the real mind bender. If everything is fundamentally mental, if it's all thoughts in this universal stream, then what on earth is the physical world? What are tables and chairs and stars and our own bodies? Yeah, let's get really concrete with this. Let's talk about something real and personal, like health. What does this mean for, say, your liver, or a doctor you go to see, or even something scary like cancerous cells? Are they all just thoughts? The answer is yes, but not in a dismissive way. They're all very real, but their reality isn't physical. The doctor you see, your own liver, even the cancerous cells, they are the extrinsic appearance, the dashboard icon. They're the outside image of an underlying mental process. So is the scalpel the doctor uses and the pills they prescribe. From this perspective, the physical scalpel and the biological cells are made of the exact same stuff, the stuff of mind. They are just what different mental processes look like from our vantage point. And this quote just nails it. It means mind and body are the same thing, just viewed differently. So when we see a physical cause and effect, like a scalpel removing a tumor, what are we really seeing? We're just watching the dashboard icons change. The scalpel is the image of a mental process. The tumor is the image of another mental process. The removal is the image of a third mental process interacting with the other two. The real causation isn't physical at all. It's happening at that deeper mental level. What we see is just the correlation, the surface level story. This validates a much richer way of looking at health, where mind and body aren't just linked, they're one. Okay, so let's zoom out. Let's bring this home. What does all this mean for you, for who you are, and what your life is all about? Well, in this story, who are you? You are a thought, a beautiful, complex, localized thought process in the universal mind. You're that whirlpool in the stream. And your body? Your body is simply what that thought process looks like from the outside. And death? Death isn't the end of awareness. It's just the end of the localization. The whirlpool dissolves, its pattern and experience flowing back into the stream it was always a part of. Consciousness itself was never born,
so it can never die.
Ultimately, this whole perspective changes everything. It suggests our lives aren't just some random biological accident in a cold, meaningless universe. Instead, we're an integral part of a vast, living, mental cosmos. So, the question we want to leave you with is this.
We all go through our entire lives with this one basic assumption, right? That the world you see around you is real. But what if it's not? What if that's the biggest assumption we've ever made? Today, we're going to dig into something called analytic idealism. And trust me, it's a philosophy that might just turn your whole view of reality completely upside down. So let's start with that one simple but huge question. Look around you. That chair you're sitting on, the screen you're looking at, the sounds you can hear, is any of it actually real? I mean, truly, fundamentally real in the way that you think it is?
Now, our gut reaction or common sense just screams, of course it's real. I can touch it, I can see it feels solid. It's obviously physical and out there, totally separate from what's going on inside my head. You know, this is our default setting. It's how we're wired to see the world.
But, and this is a big but, this common sense view, which is basically the foundation of all modern science, has a giant crack running right down the middle. It's a problem so deep and so baffling that it's often just called the hard problem.
See, our default view has a proper name. It's called physicalism, and it's the mainstream idea that absolutely everything is, at its core, just physical matter and energy. Stars, rocks, trees, even our own brains. And in this picture, consciousness, that feeling you have of being you, of experiencing things, is just a side effect. It's something the brain cooks up, kind of like a biological computer running some very complex software.
But here's the kicker. Here is the mystery that physicalism just can't seem to solve. If that's all true, how does it actually happen? How does a collection of mindless physical atoms bumping around inside your skull suddenly create the feeling of anything? The inner subjective experience of being alive? That right there is the hard problem of consciousness. I mean, really think about it. We can describe the physics and chemistry of the brain in incredible detail. We can talk about the mass of a neuron, the charge of an electron, the spin of a particle. But not a single one of those physical properties can ever explain the quality of an experience, what philosophers call qualia. There's nothing in physics that explains why red looks red to you, or why honey tastes sweet, or what it feels like to be in love. There's just this massive explanatory gap.
It's not like scientists are close to an answer. As the philosopher Bernardo Kastrup notes, the field is a mess. He says they've proposed a cornucopia, a whole buffet, of different and, get this, mutually exclusive theories for how the brain creates consciousness. They can't all be right. And when you have that many conflicting answers, it's a pretty good sign that maybe, just maybe, you're asking the wrong question or starting from a flawed assumption. So, let's try a different approach. Let's reframe this with a new metaphor. Think of your perception of the world as a kind of dashboard. And this analogy is just perfect for how our own perception works. On one side, you have the cockpit with its dials representing things like airflow and engine thrust. On the other side, you have us with our senses, sights and sounds and textures, representing the world as it is. The key here is that word representing. Our senses are giving us a useful representation of reality, but they aren't reality itself. Here's the big insight from all this. Evolution didn't shape our senses to give us the stone-cold truth. Not at all. It shaped them to give us a useful, simplified user interface to help us survive. It's like we're navigating the world using a desktop full of simple icons. They're useful for getting around, but they are not a clear, transparent window that shows us exactly what reality is.
And that leads us to the fundamental error we all tend to make. It's what happens when we forget it's a user interface. We start mistaking the map for the actual territory.
So according to analytic idealism, this is the core mistake of physicalism. It believes the dashboard is the sky. It looks at the colorful icons on our perceptual screen and insists that the world itself is actually made of those icons. It confuses the representation with the real thing that's being represented.
Okay, so if we run with this idea, it raises a huge question. If the brain isn't the little factory that manufactures consciousness, if it's not the computer creating the mind, then what in the world is it for? What is it actually doing?
And that brings us to our second really cool metaphor, the whirlpool. Think about a flowing stream of water. You see a whirlpool form. Now, is that whirlpool a separate thing that's making water? No, of course not. The whirlpool is just what the stream's flow looks like when it gets localized and starts spinning in that one spot. In exactly the same way, the brain doesn't generate consciousness. The brain is the external physical image of a process where universal consciousness gets localized into an individual point of view.
So you put the dashboard and the whirlpool ideas together, and what you get is a completely different way of looking at everything. You get a universe literally made of mind. And this is the heart of analytic idealism. It's the wild idea that reality isn't physical at its root. Instead, the fundamental stuff of the entire universe is consciousness itself. Everything that exists within consciousness, not the other way around. Matter isn't the thing that creates mind. Mind is the thing that creates our perception of matter. Let's just walk through the logic one more time. Step 1. What we call the physical world is really just the dashboard of our perceptions. Step 2. That dashboard we've established is just a representation. It's not reality itself. So, step 3, what is it a representation of? Analytic idealism makes the bold claim that the ultimate reality hiding behind our dashboard is universal consciousness.
But hang on a second. If it's all one big universal mind, why do you feel like you and I feel like me? Why do we feel so separate? Well, the theory uses a striking analogy from psychology, dissociative identity disorder, or DID. The idea is that just as a single human mind can contain multiple distinct alters that feel like separate people, maybe we are all just dissociated alters of one single universal consciousness. We're all just different whirlpools spinning in the very same stream.
So let's put these two worldviews side by side. For physicalism, the fundamental reality is matter and energy. The physical world is the real deal. The brain is a machine that generates consciousness, and consciousness itself is just an emergent property. But for analytic idealism, it's all flipped. The fundamental reality is consciousness. The physical world is just a representation inside that consciousness. The brain doesn't generate anything. It's the image of a process in consciousness. And consciousness itself is the ontological primitive. It's the absolute bedrock of all existence. And weirdly enough, there's some evidence that just doesn't sit right with physicalism. Things like psychedelic experiences, near-death experiences, even some kinds of brain damage. In all these cases, brain function is often reduced, but people report having more vivid, more expansive, and richer conscious experiences. Now, if the brain is a consciousness factory, that makes no sense. But if the brain is more like a filter, like the whirlpool localizing the stream, then it makes perfect sense. Turn down the filter, and you get more of the stream.
Okay, I know. This is some heavy philosophical stuff. But let's bring it back home. What does this actually mean for you, for me, for how we live our lives? What are the personal implications?
Well, the implications are absolutely massive. It would mean that death isn't the end of you, not the end of consciousness. It's just the dissolution of your personal whirlpool back into the greater stream. The whole mind-body problem that has plagued philosophers for centuries, it just dissolves. They're not two different things fighting each other. They're just two sides of the same coin. The universe is no longer a cold, random, meaningless accident. It has an intrinsic meaning, almost like a collective dream we're all having. And our purpose? Maybe our purpose is to simply be the eyes and ears of this universal consciousness, the countless points of view through which it gets to experience itself.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If this is right, if your entire perceived world is just a dashboard inside a cockpit, a user interface designed to help you navigate, then what lies beyond the cockpit? What does the sky really look like? That's the incredible mystery that this way of thinking invites us all to explore.